Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa, and today I am painting a wishing well in a little flowery meadow that is itself covered in flowers. And I decided to do this a little bit different than my usual thing. There's no people in it or any magical creatures, but I was casting about for inspiration because I wanted to paint, but I didn't know what to paint. So I started looking around my room, and I have decorated my room on purpose to be inspiring, and I put up a lot of my own art on the walls, and I put up art of other people that I find inspiring, and I also have a lot of knickknacks. And the reason that I buy a lot of my knickknacks is because I found them inspiring. And so I was looking at one of my knickknack shelves, and I have a blown glass wishing well on one of them, and it has some roses on it and a cute little bucket dangling from the overhang. And so I thought to myself, I would like to paint a little wishing well because I really like how cute they are. I've had various little fairy gardens in the past that I've planted with my mom, and we buy like cute little props to go in them, like little tiny benches and little tiny fairy houses, and usually also little tiny wishing wells. And so even though there is nothing inherently magical about a little well with a little hat over it and a little bucket waiting to be dropped in, they feel very magical because of the whole wishing well thing, and also just because they're very old, and so a lot of fantasy stories are set in kind of medieval times, and so the sort of times when they would have wells like this built out of stone. In fact, I was just reading a fantasy story about dragons, and the people in the town would run to their well that was fairly similar to this one and drop down their buckets to get water to put on the houses to put out the fires that the dragon was lighting. And so I find little wells like this quite inspiring because they're associated with fairy gardens and also generally with fantasy stories. And I also really felt like painting flowers. Part of it is because it is spring and I have been spending a lot more time outside. It has been a lot more sunny and a lot more temperate, and I am actually starting to be able to grow a garden because it has warmed up enough. And so I'm planting lots of things, and we're seeing flowers in the stores when we go grocery shopping, and I'm just feeling very springy. And of course, in my area, a lot of the flowering trees have started, and some of them are even finished now. So I'm just seeing flowers all over the place and really enjoying them. So I really wanted to paint some of my own, so I decided to put my little wishing well in a very Painter of Light-esque type situation with an overabundance of flowers, more than you would probably find in real life. Obviously not as well done as the Painter of Light. If you're not familiar, he was someone who painted a whole lot of little cottages with loads of flowers all over them most of the time. Those were what he was most known for, and he made really pretty things, and I find a lot of his art very inspiring. But I just decided to go kind of crazy with the flowers. Especially I really enjoy hanging flowers and flowers that are very drippy or come off of plants that are dangling or weeping. So I put a bunch of those around the sides of the wishing well and had loads of pastel pink flowers and pastel purple flowers dripping down the sides in their little vines. And then I decided to have it in a little meadow that would have nice pale green grass and some bushes with flowers and some pink flowers in the foreground and some blue flowers in the background, and maybe some bluebells or tulips. I don't know what these blue things are in the mid foreground, but they're pretty, so I painted them, and I don't care if they look realistic or not. They're just pretty flowers in my pretty little meadow that just exists for prettiness and doesn't have to make sense. I also decided to go with a fairly loose style for this because I wanted it to be kind of impressionistic, because I think that goes well with the softness of the flowers and the silliness of the idea. And so I just put in some vague shapes of trees to the background and had my brush strokes be very visible in the bushes and on the grass. I did try to have the sky not have a lot of brush strokes because I wanted it to be very smooth, and I think I added enough water that worked fairly well. And then for the stones of the wishing well, I wanted the opposite effect. I wanted each stone to look like a separate thing, even though I was using very similar colors. So I tried to give each stone time to dry while I painted another stone farther away from it, and then came back closer to the other stones, so that with the way that watercolors move, if you put even a very similar color down next to a color that is dried, usually you won't have them meld completely. There will be a bit of an outline around them, and so that's what I wanted, so that it would have the stone-like texture, and I think that worked out fairly well. I also added little bits of variation by adding a little bit more black or a little bit more brown to some of the stones, so that they wouldn't all be exactly the same, because of course if you're building out of just whatever stones you can find, they're not all going to be the exact same color. And then I added a little blue pot underneath a little plant that I had painted, because I thought this is probably a fairly often visited little well. Someone might decide to actually put a potted plant in addition to all these wildflowers growing around. And I really enjoy how a potted plant can look really nice, and I think it adds a bit of a nice difference so that it stands out a bit from all the other bushes. And I also decided I needed some more kind of foreground bushes, so that the horizon wouldn't just be these very close bushes and then straight out to hills in the background. So I added some very sticky bushes just behind those dark green ones, because we have a plant in my backyard that looks a lot like these. It has kind of dark reddish sticks that you can see more than the actual leaves, and then just added some various different colored leaves on this. I definitely had to get a little bit creative coming up with different greens, because I wanted to have loads of different colors going on and not just have everything be the same green, because of course if you go out in nature you'll see there's loads of different greens. Every plant is a different shade, and then there are different shades within those plants, and so I didn't want it to have this big look of sameness. I wanted it to look very much like you were outside in nature, and so I mixed in various other colors. I added gray in, I used all my different greens that I had, and then added other colors like blues and browns, and eventually ended up with a fair amount of variety. But most especially, I tried to relax while I was doing this. Watercolors can be so soft and relaxing to do if you just don't try too hard with them. So I tried to just make something I would enjoy and not stress about the details being right, or making sure it looked realistic, or making sure everything was perfect. And just tried to let the brush do what it would, let the water do what it would, and I just kept working on it so that I could keep adding things to make it look better instead of having to have everything fall into the right place. I could just keep fiddling with it until I thought it was perfect. I mixed some more red and white, got a little bit darker pink so that my pink flowers would stand out some more. Did the same with some of the purples, and I'm really happy with my droopy purple flowers. I still don't know of a real flower that they actually look like, but they look like, you know, a version of a real flower. And eventually I got to the roof of my little well, and I used much the same technique that I used with the stones, and kind of tried to make shingles that were kind of separated from each other even though they were very close to the same color. And there are some things that I could like better about this. I would like the details maybe to stand out more, but I really like the idea of letting it be really vague and not using any inks or any fine details, and just, using this medium-sized brush even for the small things so that I wouldn't have too much control over it and I wouldn't sweat the details too much. And I did actually find doing this really relaxing once I settled into it and let go and started just enjoying the creative process and enjoying seeing something that made me think of magic and made me think of beautiful spring. And I just kept fiddling and not being sure of what direction I wanted to go, adding little things to fill in the white spaces because I had been quite loose with it, so I didn't have any real lines, and I had some white spaces left to fill in. And near the end I felt like it wasn't quite floral enough, so I decided to add in buttercups, because buttercups are something that I see when I go over to the west side of my state. I live in Washington and I live on the dry side. Over the mountains we're in a rain shadow, so we don't have nearly as many wildflowers. We irrigate and our flowers pretty much grow where we've planted them, but when I go over to the west side of the state on vacation and weekends and things, I can see in the grass there are just flowers growing there, and some of them are these very cute little white daisies, and they're also little buttercups, which are such pretty flowers. They're just a little tiny, about a centimeter across, and they're just this lovely golden color, and I love to look at them. So I decided to add little patches of those in my little meadow, and then I decided that the bushes weren't flowery enough, so I decided to make them into hydrangea bushes. And so on this side of the state, our soil is different from the other side, so on this side of the state, hydrangeas are pink, and on the other side, they are more blue and purple. And so I decided to stick with the wetter side of the state theme and made them bluey purpley hydrangeas. So I used some of my sparkly blue because sometimes metallic watercolors are a lot more opaque than other watercolors, and I already had a fair amount of green down, so in order to have the blue showed up I needed it to be fairly opaque. So I started with that for a base of the hydrangeas, and then added on little spots of purple and another shade of blue. And there you have it, my little peaceful meadow filled with flowers and with trees and a pretty blue sky. And I hope this has been somewhat relaxing for you as well. I am very fond of this little piece. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!